You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Friday, August 4th, 2017, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. And it's got to be former President Barack Obama's 56th birthday. Happy birthday, Mr. President, the last holder of that office I can say that title for and not throw up a little bit in my mouth. Happy birthday also goes out to my youngest niece, Hannah Velasquez. Happy birthday, Hannah. And for today's show, so glad you could join us here for the weekend because all sorts of interesting developments happening in the cannabis community. And I've been fielding a lot of messages on Facebook and Twitter and even some emails from people that want me to go into a little more detail on a couple of subjects. So that's what we're going to do on today's show. Right after the news, we're going to get involved in a cannabis community chat. I had some readers on my Facebook page ask about these cannabis churches and the use of cannabis as a sacrament. What's the legal status of that? Is this legit? And are these churches and then the busts of these churches helping or hurting the overall movement to legalize marijuana for all adults? And we'll dig into that. We'll spend some time in that in the cannabis community chat right in the middle of the podcast. At the end of the podcast, we'll have time for a radical rant. I don't know if you caught the news. It'll be in our headlines as well. But the Pharma Bro, Martin Shkreli, got busted and sentenced, or convicted at least, on 3 counts of fraud. He forgot the number one lesson, and Bernie Madoff could have told them this. You can't get away with it if you rip off the rich white people. You rip off the rich white people, they will hold you accountable and bust you and send you to a real prison. So for the rant today, I want to talk a little bit about Shkreli and the pharmaceutical industry and the whole concept of Western medicine and how we've put that together and why medical marijuana doesn't go far enough. We've got to take this all the way over the finish line with adult marijuana legalization. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why only legalization is the antidote to the pharma bros like Martin Shkreli and these pharmaceutical companies that want to keep us addicted and paying in all that money for their pills. So that's coming up at the end of the show. But first, let's take you to the cannabis headline news. We got some developments with our Attorney General to tell you about.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority Founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, August 4th, 2017. I'm Russ Belville. Marijuana Moment reports that U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions sent a letter to Washington state officials criticizing the implementation of their marijuana law. He cites a law enforcement report that he says, quote, raises serious questions about the efficacy of marijuana regulatory structures in your state, end quote. Among other things, Sessions quotes passages from the report on interstate diversion, use by minors, and driving under the influences, all implications of the Cole Memo. Quote, these findings are relevant to the policy debate concerning marijuana legalization, end quote, Sessions wrote to Washington Governor Jay Inslee and Attorney General Bob Ferguson. Continuing, quote, please advise as to how Washington plans to address the findings in the Northwest High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area report, including efforts to ensure that all marijuana activity is compliant with state marijuana laws, to combat the diversion of marijuana, to protect public health and safety, and to prevent marijuana use by minors, end quote. The Cannabis reports today that a similar letter was sent to Governor John Hickenlooper of Colorado with the same boilerplate text with references to that region's Rocky Mountain high-intensity drug trafficking area. Oregon Governor Kate Brown signed House Bill 2198, making sweeping changes to the state's medical marijuana program. The primary change is the creation of an 8-member Oregon Cannabis Council that shall have oversight and reporting responsibilities over the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program, or OMMP. The new law also provides for medical marijuana grow sites that are producing more than 12 plants to sell up to 20 pounds of their excess marijuana flower to licensed retail outlets, so long as the licensed growers cannot adequately meet demand. The law also sets a hard limit of 12 mature cannabis plants and 24 immature plants at medical marijuana grow sites formed since 2015 within residentially zoned areas. Immature plants are now defined by statute as those non-flowering plants that are also under 24 inches in height. The new law also grants power to localities to ban medical-only dispensaries without requiring a vote of the people and allows marijuana retailers to locate within 500 feet of a school if there are physical or geographic barriers preventing child access, such as a fence or a canal. Nevada gaming regulators are now asking questions about the effect of marijuana legalization in relation to laws regarding gambling. At an event held by the American Gaming Association, or AGA, at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas on Thursday, Terry Johnson, a member of the Nevada Gaming Control Board, pointed out that, quote, "We have existing regulations that talk about impairment from alcohol and gambling, but the statutes and regulations are silent on what happens when the persons might be impaired from marijuana intoxication and continue to gamble," end quote. Yesterday, a report in Massroots noted that officials from the AGA were seeking, quote, "clarification of the industry's obligation in preparing suspicious activity reports," end quote, for gamblers whose income casinos know is derived from marijuana-related sources. Among core members of the AGA are Steve Wynn and Sheldon Adelson, both casino owners of the Wynn and Sands, respectively, who donated millions of dollars to the campaigns opposing marijuana legalization in Massachusetts and Nevada. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is calling a report by the Drug Policy Alliance, quote, "misleading," end quote, for its review of NYPD marijuana arrests that shows them to disproportionately impact people of color. DPA says, quote, "Black and Latino New Yorkers continue to comprise 85% of the more than 60,000 people arrested for low-level marijuana possession on Mayor de Blasio's watch," end quote. In response, the mayor's office released a statement noting that, quote, "arrests for marijuana possession are down 37%, with approximately 9,600 fewer arrests of Black and Latino New Yorkers for marijuana possession in 2016 as compared to 2013, end quote. The mayor's response does not address the fact, noted by DPA, that the rate of minority arrests under de Blasio, 85%, is virtually identical to the 86% rate under his predecessor, Mayor Bloomberg. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, August 4th, 2017. I'm Russ Belville.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com, City of Portland permit number 17-159855.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
It's like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking.
Learn more at mjagenda.com.
If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
The cannabis community is a diverse set of people from all walks of life. Conservative and liberal, black and white, straight and gay, rich and poor, and everyone in between. Learn more about the people we are freeing from adult cannabis prohibition in our Cannabis Community Chat.
All right, today in the Cannabis Community Chat, I want to address some stories we've told you this week regarding cannabis churches. There have been a couple stories, most recently the one out of California where there was a shooting, police shooting of a man at a farm that was registered under a Rastafarian church in California. And there's been other discussion about this. And on my Facebook page, I got a request from some listeners who wanted to hear more about this, about just in general, the whole concept of cannabis churches, and are they helping or hurting the cause of legalization? Well, I'll tell you that they're not really helping. And I don't mean that from a public relations point of view. I mean it from a tactical point of view. If the point of having the cannabis church is a political point, and we got to put aside for the second, is it legitimate belief? Is it just opportunism? Is there a First Amendment right? Whatever. Let's put that aside for a second and just say, as a political tactic, if the goal here is let's have a religious right to cannabis so that we can, through the back door, through a loophole, legalize marijuana, no, it's not going to help. The courts have been pretty consistent on this in their decisions. Even after the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that Bill Clinton signed, the courts have been pretty clear that marijuana as a sacrament isn't going to work like it works for peyote, ayahuasca, mescaline in some cases, other substances that certain religious believers are allowed to use as sacrament, despite the fact that they are controlled substances. They're Schedule I drugs in most cases. And the way it works is that there's this balance in the law. And it has to do with the government's got on its side a compelling interest to enforce the law. The government, that's its job. It's there to enforce the law. On the other side, we've got the rights of the people. And among them are First Amendment rights and the right to religion and sacraments. And according to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, there's a test that's set up where you gotta balance this out. You gotta say, all right, is what we're doing the least restrictive way to allow the government to still enforce the law without infringing too much on people's rights? And it's a balancing act there. Now, when they look at the compelling interest side for the government when it comes to these religious claims on cannabis use, the government's point is, hey, our job is to enforce the law. Law says you can't have cannabis. Law says it's Schedule I. Law says we got to take that away and put you in a cage. And for now, we have to put aside, is that right? Should that be? Is it constitutional? We've got to put that aside. What is. And the fact is, there is a law. Controlled Substance Act says marijuana is illegal. Federal officials got to bust you for it. So that's the government's compelling interest. We got to enforce the law. We got to stop people from smoking pot. Now, on the other side, you got the interest of the people and their rights to practice their religion. Now, that right isn't absolute, right? If you belong to, say, like some ancient Aztec death cult that required the sacrifice of an 18-year-old virgin, first of all, try finding an 18-year-old virgin. But second, that doesn't, just because there's that religion, that's your religion to sacrifice humans, doesn't mean that you get to do that. The government's got a compelling interest to stop people from killing people, and that more than outweighs your religious right to kill people. Okay, so that's the extreme example. But when it comes to these drug use cases, when it comes to the sacramental use of these things, first thing the government's got to weed out, pardon the pun, is, are you legit? And a lot of cannabis churches fail in that regard, in that they don't have, a practice. They don't have a set standard of ceremonies and holidays and culture and so forth. It's guys that decided, hey, I like to smoke pot and I think that's cool and I'm going to make a church. A lot of times that's where those cases, they don't even make it to trial. But the ones that do and can claim legitimate spiritual use, Oklavua Church, the Rastafarians, Coptic Christians, there's a lot of them. When they do get to trial, what happens is when they do this balancing test, they have to figure out what's the least restrictive means, right? If we banned this, would it infringe on their religious right? Well, that's for sure. Absolutely. If you stop these religious people from using cannabis as a sacrament, you're infringing on their right. Or peyote, or ayahuasca, or mescaline, or whatever it might be. You're infringing on their religious sacrament. So there's no doubt that it's an infringement, but does that infringement outweigh the compelling interest? Now, compelling interest is stop the general population from using drugs. In the case of something like peyote, or ayahuasca, it's pretty easy to tell who are the religious practitioners. They belong to registered tribes. They have ceremonies. They use it ceremoniously. They're not using it all the time. They're not always bombed out on ayahuasca. You couldn't function if that were the case, right? It's a ceremonial thing that happens every now and then, right? So it's easy to tell who's using it. They're not using it all the time. And outside of those churches, not a whole lot of people are using ayahuasca or peyote or mescaline, right? There are some. There are some trippers out there that like that stuff, but generally speaking, it's not way up there on the list of popular drugs. Makes you puke, it can be a bad trip, it's just not that popular. But when it comes to the cannabis, now all the things we can say about peyote and ayahuasca don't apply. First of all, hard to tell who are the legitimate religious users because so many people use marijuana. There are 30 million marijuana smokers. Second of all, the people that do use it religiously use it all the time. It's not just ceremonial. It's tree of life. It's let's smoke all day, all night and commune with the creator. And third, it would be hard since you can't separate out who are the religious ones easily enough, and you can't separate what use is religious use because they're using it all the time. The compelling interest of the government to be able to stop everybody from being able to smoke pot except religious users would be impossible. In other words, your God's sacrament is too popular. Cannabis is used by too many people for too many purposes for us to be able to separate out who the religious users are so we can bust everyone else. So we got to keep it illegal for everyone. Now, that's a weird ruling, you realize, because cannabis, the use of it is pretty mild compared to going off on a spirit journey on ayahuasca, for example. So we're actually in a situation where the government's fine with you using these way heavy-duty psychedelics in religious practice, but not so much smoking the herb. Now, all of this should be understood that I'm not endorsing this point of view. I think it's ridiculous that we stop anybody from using any herb for any purpose, much less religious users using it for a sacramental purpose. But is it helping? It's not helping in that it doesn't get us to what we want. It's not helping in that it discriminates against me, a person who of no faith, who doesn't have a God to have a sacrament for. It's not helping in the sense that the people who aren't legit, who get into it and make everyone else look bad as far as, oh yeah, sure, it's a church. They're just, a bunch of pot smokers trying to find an excuse to get high. And it's just, I'm afraid overall, it's not helping the cause. But for those legitimate practitioners of it, that doesn't matter. What does matter is when they try to charge other people $200 for a get out of jail free card they know won't work. I'll have to save that for another rant. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. If you're a cannabis brand looking to build trust and awareness within the community, consider becoming a sponsor of this program. Your message will be seen and heard by the most dedicated followers of marijuana policy reform, who are loyal and supportive of those brands that give back to the community. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button to learn how your brand can also be featured in my live nationwide appearances. Thank you for your support.
The Marijuana Agenda. Like the liberal agenda, but with profits. Ka-ching.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is proudly sponsored by the Marijuana Business Association. The MJBA, called by NBC News the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce, is the fastest-growing business association and the fastest-growing industry in America. I've been working with the MJBA for years, and I personally invite you to join the MJBA. MJBA also publishes the popular MJ Headline News on Facebook and the MJNewsNetwork.com and Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube. Visit mjba.net for more details.
total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Just say no.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I am here.
That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
People don't smoke marijuana.
Well, there was a nice piece of news for us to start off our Friday and go right into the weekend. No, it's not that Trump is going on vacation for 17 days. I mean, Lord knows he needs the break from all the golf he's been playing. No, the news that got me so excited this morning, so happy, put a smile on my face, is the following. Former drug company CEO Martin Shkreli was convicted Friday on 3 counts of deceiving investors and hedge funds, according to a report in The Hill. The 34-year-old faces up to 20 years in prison, according to CNBC. Shkreli became notorious for hiking the price of a life-saving treatment called Daraprim by more than 5,000% overnight after buying up the drug. The drug is mostly used by AIDS and cancer patients as well as pregnant women. His lack of remorse and arrogant public persona earned him the derisive media nickname Pharma Bro. Shkreli called the fraud case against him, quote, bogus, end quote, according to the Associated Press. Shkreli testified in 2016 at a House Oversight Committee hearing on rising drug prices. During his testimony, he dodged questions and made faces, and afterward, he attacked lawmakers as, quote, imbeciles, end quote, on Twitter. Yeah, couldn't happen to a better guy, facing 20 years in prison, although there's a Time magazine report out that Martin Shkreli says he's unfazed and thinks that he can get away with probation. Martin, I told you, man, you can't rip off the rich white people. Everybody else, you can screw over the pregnant women, you can screw over the AIDS patients, the cancer patients. You rip off the rich white people, they'll hold you to account for that. But this whole point, this whole story about Martin Shkreli just is a bigger piece of a larger puzzle, right? Shkreli, just Pharma Bro, let's just call him Pharma Bro, just represents basic pharmaceutical company, basic healthcare industry, health insurance industry ethics. It's a business. It's a for-profit business. And this is the thing we've got to get through our thick heads as Americans, is that some things shouldn't be a business. Some things should not have a profit motive behind them. Healthcare is one of those things. Prisons are another. We'll talk about that in another rant. But when it comes to the healthcare industry, if getting someone hooked on a pill is going to keep them coming back and buying that pill, that's what the company's going to do. It is required by law for corporations to maximize the investment of their shareholders. If the shareholders have invested in an opioid drug, it is the corporation's duty to get as many people on that opioid drug, buying as much of that opioid drug as many times as they can buy that opioid drug. And we're surprised there's an opioid crisis? How can we be? How can we be surprised when we have put a profit motive behind getting people addicted? We've put a profit motive behind keeping people sick. We're getting what we profitize. We get what we incentivize in this country. And by turning healthcare into a commodity that can be bought and sold, by attaching it to our employment, think about how sick that is. That whether or not we care about you as a country, whether or not you can live or die, whether or not you can have good health or bad health, is determined as to whether or not you pledge fealty to some employer, right? That your health care is tied to working for someone. Now, I know someone out there is going to say, no, it's not. You can buy your own private health care. Yeah, sure. With the money you make jerking off at night, what? How are people making money without working? No other country does this. No other country ties their health care to whether or not you're employed. But there's a good reason from the corporation's point of view why they do that. If you could die by quitting, you're less likely to quit. If you have to go to that cubicle every day in order to ensure that your kid with the pre-existing condition doesn't die, you'll put up with all sorts of shit. You'll put up with working overtime. You'll put up with taking emails off work hours. You'll put up with all sorts of stuff rather than lose that health care. Now, what does this all have to do with marijuana? Well, it has to do with the fact that medical marijuana is the antidote to this. And I don't mean the antidote in it's a replacement for opioids or it's a great medicine. It is. Don't get me wrong on that. It's fantastic. It's the best potential cancer treatment we've got. It's fantastic for seizures and spasms and pain and everything. But it's not what cannabis does. I mean, there's a lot of plants that have miraculous healing powers. The miracle of medical marijuana is that it reverses that paradigm. It takes us out of this profit motive healthcare and puts it back into our own hands. It puts our healing back into the paradigm of being at one with nature rather than being a slave to a corporation, being shackled to the development of new synthetic chemicals that don't cure what's wrong with you, but keep you coming back for more of them. That's why medical marijuana was so greatly opposed when it first came out. It wasn't because it was a plant that had healing powers. No, it was because it was a plant that had healing powers that they couldn't patent. A plant that had healing powers that you could grow in your backyard. A plant that had healing powers that you didn't have to go to South America to find. That's what pisses them off about medical marijuana. And so the tale of Martin Shkreli and the Pharma Bros and how they'll jack up a life-saving drug by 5,000% should be a warning shot to everybody who still holds on to the medical marijuana paradigm. Because what has happened since we started medical marijuana is the corporations, being the neutral sociopathic entities they are, in order to survive, they adapt. They adapt, they evolve, they deal with the new situations they're confronted with. And confronted with, oh my God, they're all going to start growing plants in their backyard to deal with their illnesses, they're adapting. They know that if marijuana remains illegal and they can get their synthetic cannabinoids and whole plant extracts patented and through the FDA approval process, and then get those onto the shelves of pharmacies where they're marked up a whole bunch so their profit can be made, and where they're paid for by health insurance plans, they know that every state that doesn't have medical marijuana will then not go for it. What is the impetus to legalize medical marijuana if grandma on Medicare can go to the pharmacy and get some GW Pharmaceuticals Epidiolex or Sativex or whatever X they make next? What's the impetus to legalize the plants that people can grow and sell in the black market to those dirty dopers? And for those states that currently have medical cannabis programs but don't allow people to grow their own plants, what's to stop them from taking out that whole plant extract and putting in the one from GW Pharma or whatever pharmaceutical company comes next? So the point of this is to understand that the pharmaceutical realm and the healthcare realm have adapted to medical marijuana with the idea if we can't beat them, join them or steal them, more accurately. If we can't beat them, let's make marijuana, let's make cannabis like every other pharmaceutical preparation that has to be prepared in a lab and specifically mixed and put into a bottle, and it's got a barcode and you got to have insurance to buy it and get it, a note from a doctor to have it. Let's make it like every other drug. The only solution that kills the Pharma Bro paradigm, that puts the stake through the heart of the Martin Shkrelis in the world, is legalization of cannabis for all people, for all purposes, for any reason whatsoever. Adults, I'd go 18 and above. I'll start with 21 because I understand the political ramifications. But only recognizing that this is a right we all have to cultivate this plant, regardless of what our reasons may be, is the only thing that gets to the patients the medical marijuana that shatters that medical paradigm. We are moving away from a time where there will be any legal separation between medical or recreational. In the states that have legalized recreational, they're just absorbing medical. In the states that don't have a distinction yet, medical will become cannabinoid pharmaceuticals. The only fight left is legalization for all of us. That's all the time we got today. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week for more news and interviews you can use for the cannabis community. For everyone here at Delta 9 House, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
You plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it.